Let's take a look now at the extractor brushes in ZBrush and how they function. You'll find the extractor brushes under B for brush, X for extractor, and there's 3 variations here, and they're just based around different types of strokes. There's the standard brush extractor, there's the extractor dot stroke, and the drag rectangle stroke. So what the extractor brush does is it allows us to extract detail from one surface and then apply it to another. So for example, if we go to our alien here, where we've got some texture on the side of the head, we've got this interesting skin texture here. If I zoom in and then go to B for brush, X for extractor, and select the T hotkey, the first extractor brush. And if we go to the brush menu and tear this off to the side of the screen, now watch what happens if I press the G key. My brush becomes blue. Now what this means is that I am now able to extract using this brush. So if I go to alpha here and tear the alpha menu off, now you see that I've got from brush, I'm using the extractor brush, and my stroke is just the dot stroke, which is the same as the freehand stroke. You'll also see that my alpha width is set to 128 and I have a blur seam of 25. So if I click and drag, I just drag a stroke along the surface there, and you see that it has extracted both an alpha for the detail and a texture map. So if we go back to our tools, and I'll switch over to that polysphere, now I've got my brush set to RGB and Z add. If I click and drag, it's adding to this surface. So let's go ahead and colorize this mesh. So I'm going to go to Polypaint, turn on colorize, and you see it's adding the color data as well. So as I'm drawing this texture on here, it's transferring both the sculptural detail and the polypaint. If I turn off colorize, you can see there's just the sculptural detail. So let's switch back over to the alien head. And this time I'll go to B for brush, X for extractor, and I'll select the drag rectangle, which is my personal favorite. It drags out a rectangle to capture the detail. So we'll zoom in here, and I will press the G key, which is the hotkey to activate from mesh here under the alpha menu. Now the alpha width is set to 128. I could set this to 256 or 1024. The higher the alpha width, the more detail we're going to grab from this, or the higher resolution the detail. So if I click and drag like this, you see it drags out a rectangle. Now I've got a square alpha of both detail and texture. So if we go back to that polysphere, I'll add another subdivision level so there's a little bit more detail that we can get out of this mesh. Click and drag, you see it's dragging out that alpha that we captured as a rectangle. And if I go to colorize and turn colorize back on this mesh, you see it's also adding. So we have the option to add both color and sculptural detail. And you see if we zoom in here, the higher resolution, the higher we're able to capture all those little fine pores and details. So if I drag over here and do another one, you see we get quite a fine resolution to this. So this is a wonderful way to take existing Z tools, capture detail that you've already sculpted, and then transfer that over to other meshes. So in this same file, I have a selection of head scans. And these are great scans. They come from the website 3dscanstore.com. And I recommend going and checking them out because they've got some really good reference scans available. You can get these for really reasonable prices. So this is a scan. This is actually a free base mesh that you can get if you sign up for their mailing list. And here I've got some nice forehead wrinkles. So if I zoom into this, and there's no color information here, so it's not going to need to capture color detail. I'll go back to my extractor brush and I'll press the G hotkey. So now I'm capturing the surface detail. I'll just click and drag that out. Now that's going to capture those forehead wrinkles. So if we go back over to our polysphere, click and drag, it's dragging out an alpha of those details. Now I can adjust my Z intensity. I could turn this up again. You can see the difference that we get there. We can actually really get some nice, fine, crisp details there. Now, there's a little bit of noise in that scan that it's picking up, but that's fine. We can just smooth that back a little bit with the smooth brush, and there's no trouble at all. We can basically take any sorts of detail that we want and transfer them right over. So there's another behavior where you can actually store targets within your undo history to extract detail from. So I'm going to switch over to another tool here, and this also is a scan which was purchased from 3D Scan Store. So this is a great bit of reference for a human hand. And there are these wonderful details on the knuckles here. So this has been remeshed and has multiple subdivision levels. So what I will do is I will go to my tool menu here, or go to my tool. Under Tool, I will open Morph Target, and I'm going to store a morph target. Now that stores a copy of the mesh in memory at its current state. Now I'll step down a subdivision or two. I'll use the smooth brush to smooth the surface of one of these knuckles. Now I will step back up my subdivision levels and then switch my morph target back. Now what I've done is I've created an undo state back here where this has all been smoothed down. So if I have the extractor brush selected and I control click on this undo state, it highlights it white. Now if I go back to my last undo where I have restored the shape, when I extract, it will generate the alpha based on the difference between the smooth surface and the detailed surface. So this allows us to capture less the overall forms of the mesh and more the actual undulating shapes of the wrinkles and surface details. So let's zoom in here and let's press the G hotkey, click and drag to capture this wrinkle. Now, where the mesh starts to curve around the edges, we might catch a little bit of an artifacting there. We'll have to just check and see what we get. So we've captured those wrinkles, those knuckle wrinkles. Let's go back over to our sphere. And let's move over to a clean area. And then let's click and drag. You see that we're adding that detail in, but we are getting a couple little spikes along the edges there. So what I'll do is I will undo, and I will take my focal shift, turn that down a bit, then we'll draw that mesh, draw that stroke on again. You see it gives us a bit of a gradient or fade along that edge. If I lower my focal shift one more time, you see that we can more and more reduce that. Now, if this continues to be an issue, there is another option that we have where we can go back to that hand. And because there are UVs on here, we can morph UV to morph this flat. There is more detail on this in our chapter on UV mapping, but essentially if there's UVs on the mesh, you can morph UV. And morph UV will allow you to sculpt and paint in a flattened view like this. So I could zoom in now to that knuckle in flattened mode, press the G hotkey, and then capture that detail from a flattened mesh. Now I'll go ahead and turn off morph UV so that returns to its three-dimensional shape. We'll go back to our sphere. Now when I draw this out, we're going to have to actually invert that and turn our Z intensity down. Oops. We don't have to invert it. It was just turned up so high. There we go. So it's going to change sort of the intensity of that capture, but you see that we're getting it as a flat extraction now. So you can come over to the edges and you can feather those edges. You could also go to your alpha and go to the modifiers and turn up the RF slider, which is radial fade, which gives you a vignette, a faded edge along the borders of your alpha. So you see you get that. There's still a little bit of a line there, so what I'll do is I'll go to my RF and turn that up a bit more. There you go. So that gives us a real nice fade on the edge. So let's take a look at how we can apply this to another model that's more useful. If I switch over to the Kovadomoni hand here, I've got a creature hand. We've got 7 million polygons in this particular Z tool. So if I zoom in to one of these knuckles, you see I don't have any sort of wrinkle detail really sculpted into the knuckles here, but I've got this wrinkle detail captured in this brush. I'll turn off RGB because there is poly paint on this particular model, but we don't have a texture captured here, otherwise it would overwrite the poly painting. Click and drag, and it'll start to draw that wrinkle texture out, and I can just position that however I like. And then we can start to add wrinkle details to these knuckles, do a little bit of smoothing on that just to incorporate it a little bit better into the surface. And this is a huge time saver. You can also, crisscross these. You could add these on top of each other and sort of give yourself a bit more of a wrinkled appearance or gnarled appearance just by adjusting how many of these alphas you apply here. So if we go over here to the knuckle of the thumb, and let's place a wrinkle here as well. There we go. That's quite nice. And we'll just smooth that back a little bit. If we go back over to our hand scan, we could capture other details off of this. Let's say, for example, I want to capture these wrist wrinkles. Let's find a good, or let's actually grab something like this bit of texture here on the wrist. So what I would do is I would go back to my Morph UV, so it's a flattened mesh. Let's find the area which we want to capture. So I could capture the wrinkles in the palm, I could capture the back of the hand, I could capture these wrinkles here. Let's capture this right here. Press the G key, click drag, and we're just going to capture that bit of texture right there. So you see it's extracting a map, and it will add that to the brush. I'll turn off Morph UV so that returns to a three-dimensional form, and let's go back over to our Covid Demoni hand. And then let's see what it looks like if we take that bit of texture and then click drag to apply that to the back of the hand. Let's turn off Polypaint so we can see this purely as sculpture. I'll come down here to Polypaint and turn off Colorize. Now we can see just the surface sculpture, just the sculptural detail. Let's undo that. I think I would like those wrinkles to be on the other end, so I'm going to undo. Turn off Colorize. Now click drag, and I will rotate my stroke now so those wrinkles fall where I actually want them to. So that feels a lot better to have those wrinkles there at the wrist area. So you can see basically any sort of scan data, any sort of Z tool where you have detail that you want to capture, you can use the mesh or the extractor brushes to extract that as color texture and as an alpha, and then store these as brushes. I could save this brush if I wanted to by going to Brush, Save As, or I could simply take this alpha and then export it so I always have this alpha available, and then I could apply this to another brush and make custom brushes or a multi-alpha brush, as we talk about in our 3D alphas chapter. So this makes capturing alpha details incredibly simple using this particular brush. And as I said, my preference is for the drag rectangle stroke. I like dragging out a specific area of detail. But if you do have something that you want to sort of capture that is detail that's running along sort of a line, like wrinkles, for example, if we go back to that hand scan, you could drag a stroke along here using B for brush, X for extractor, and just use this regular extractor brush. Hold the G hotkey, and we could extract along this strip here, and that's going to give us a repeating trail of wrinkles like this. So if we go back to our creature hand, F for focus, we come over here to the underside and then click drag, you see it adds those wrinkles as one contiguous stroke. And then I can crisscross those if I want to and build up a real nice skin texture just by extracting that one bit of detail off of that scan. So that completes this look at extractor brushes. They're relatively new. They were released just in the previous version of ZBrush, and I think they're one of the most fantastic new tools that have come about recently. I love using them. I think it makes creating your own custom alpha library so much easier, and there's just no limit to what you can capture because there's so much scan data out there, and there's so many Z tools that everyone's created in their own libraries once they've been doing ZBrush for a while. So this really opens the door to creating a lot of really exciting and really useful alphas and custom brushes. So I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you in the next video.